Sometimes death doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks quietly through a hospital hallway wearing a white coat. The first alarm shattered the silence at 2:13 a.m. sharp. Mechanical. Cold enough to make every nurse on the third floor stop breathing for half a second. Code blue. ICU room 7. Rain hammered against the windows of St. Mercy Veterans Medical Center outside Baltimore, turning the parking lot into a sheet of trembling black glass beneath the streetlights. The storm had rolled in an hour earlier, heavy with Atlantic wind and the smell of wet asphalt drifting through every automatic door that opened downstairs. Inside the ICU wing, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, pale blue against wax tile floors. Machines hummed. Ventilators hissed softly. Somewhere far down the corridor, a television muttered through static no one was watching. And standing outside room 7 like a statue carved from shadow and muscle was Rex. The 6-year-old German shepherd did not move when the alarm sounded. His sable fur was damp along the shoulders from the rain earlier that night, dark streaks of black running down his spine like smoke trapped beneath skin. His amber eyes stayed fixed on the glass window of the ICU door, unblinking, watching. The dog's ears twitched once as hurried footsteps echoed closer. Nurses rushed past carrying crash equipment. Rubber soles squeaked against the polished floor. A respiratory therapist pushed through the crowd while muttering oxygen levels under his breath. But Rex ignored all of them. His attention locked onto one man entering the room behind the medical team. Tall, calm, white coat perfectly pressed. Dr. Adrian Shaw. The moment the doctor stepped through the doorway, something inside Rex changed. The shepherd's posture stiffened so suddenly the leather leash hanging loose from the nearby chair snapped taut against the metal leg. A low growl vibrated deep inside his chest. Not loud, not wild, controlled. The kind of sound trained Marines learned to fear because it meant the dog had noticed something long before the humans did. Inside the room, Staff Sergeant Ethan Vale lay unconscious beneath dim hospital lights. 37 years old. Former Marine recon. White male. Broad-shouldered, even beneath the thin blankets. A healing cut traced across his temple beneath short dark brown hair, still damp from surgery prep. Electrodes clung to his chest while green lines crawled across the monitor beside him in slow, uneven waves. The room smelled of antiseptic, plastic tubing, and the faint metallic scent of dried rainwater still trapped in Ethan's boots near the wall. Dr. Shaw adjusted Ethan's fore without speaking. Calm hands. Steady movements. But Rex's growl deepened. One of the nurses glanced nervously toward the dog. "Can somebody move him back?" she whispered. "He's upsetting the floor again." Rex didn't bark. He stared directly at the doctor's hand. His nose twitched once. Twice. Then the shepherd suddenly slammed forward against the leash with enough force to drag the chair several feet across the tile. Metal screeched through the hallway. Nurses jumped. "Easy," a security guard shouted, rushing forward. But Rex wasn't looking at the guards, or the nurses, or the flashing monitors. He was staring at the syringe in Dr. Shaw's hand. And for the first time that night, the dog began barking like he was trying to stop death itself from entering the room. 3 hours earlier, the storm had not yet reached Baltimore. The roads were only beginning to darken beneath low-hanging clouds drifting inland from the Chesapeake Bay. Ethan Vale drove north along Interstate 95 in a battered gray Ford pickup with one hand resting loosely on the steering wheel, while the other absently rubbed the scar near his ribs beneath his jacket. The heater rattled weakly against the cold creeping through the cab. Beside him, Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, silent and alert, ears twitching toward every passing sound outside. The German shepherd always rode like that, never sleeping deeply, never fully relaxed. Ethan once joked that the dog trusted traffic less than enemy territory. Tonight, though, something felt different. The farther they drove from the harbor district near Dundalk, the more restless Rex became. His nose lifted toward the half-open window as cold November air drifted inside, carrying the scent of diesel fuel, seawater, and distant rain. Baltimore glowed faintly ahead through the windshield, smeared gold and white against the darkening sky. Cargo cranes stood along the waterfront like giant skeletons frozen against the horizon. Ethan glanced sideways at the dog. "What is it, partner?" he asked quietly. Rex did not look at him. A low sound rolled in the dog's throat. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan felt it immediately because Rex had only made that sound a handful of times before. Once outside Kandahar after an explosive sweep, once beneath a collapsed warehouse in Syria, and once during a training exercise when a Marine concealed chemical residue inside an empty truck just to test the K9 unit. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. "You smell something?" Rex suddenly shifted forward in the seat, staring through the windshield toward the harbor exit ramp. His posture became rigid, focused, the same posture he used before identifying danger. Ethan slowed the truck as they approached a red light near an abandoned shipping yard. Rain began tapping lightly against the windshield now, thin at first, barely more than mist. To the left stood rows of rusted cargo containers stacked 3 stories high behind chain-link fencing. Sodium floodlights flickered above the docks, buzzing softly in the damp air. The entire harbor smelled wrong tonight. Sharp, chemical, almost sweet beneath the saltwater breeze. Then Ethan smelled it too. Chlorine, faint but unmistakable. Rex let out another growl and pressed his nose harder toward the cracked window. Ethan frowned. There should not be chlorine out here. The light turned green. A black SUV rolled slowly through the intersection ahead of them without headlights. Ethan's marine instincts stirred immediately. Too slow. Too deliberate. Rex's ears pinned back. The dog's amber eyes locked onto the vehicle as it disappeared between rows of shipping containers near Pier 14. Ethan hesitated only a second before steering toward the harbor road. "Just a quick look," he muttered. The rain thickened as they entered the industrial yard. Water shimmered across broken pavement beneath the truck tires. Somewhere overhead, metal chains clanged softly against a cargo crane swaying in the wind. The farther they drove, the quieter the world became. No workers. No forklifts. No harbor noise. Only rain and the distant groan of ships against dock lines. Rex suddenly barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Ethan reached beneath his jacket instinctively, his pulse slowing into the cold, calm Marines carried into dangerous places. Ahead, near the loading bay of Warehouse C, the black SUV sat parked with its engine running. And standing beside it beneath the flickering dock light was a man in a white coat. The man beneath the dock light looked completely ordinary at first glance, and somehow that made Rex trust him even less. White coat, dark slacks, rain beating neatly along polished black shoes. One hand tucked calmly inside a coat pocket while the other held a small silver case no larger than a lunchbox. The yellow harbor light flickered overhead, washing his face pale against the storm. Ethan eased the truck forward another few yards and killed the headlights. Rain tapped steadily against the hood now, louder in the sudden darkness. Rex stood halfway across the bench seat, muscles taut beneath his wet fur. His eyes never left the man. Ethan studied the loading bay carefully. Warehouse C had been closed for almost 6 months after a chemical storage inspection failure. He remembered reading about it in a veteran's newsletter while recovering in North Carolina. No scheduled shipments. No authorized staff. Yet the SUV engine still idled softly beside the dock. "Something is wrong here," Ethan murmured. Rex answered with a faint rumble deep in his chest. The man in the white coat slowly turned toward the truck as though he had been expecting them. Even from 50 yards away, Ethan noticed how calm he seemed. No surprise, no confusion, just stillness, the kind that made trained soldiers uneasy. Then the man smiled faintly. Not friendly, not hostile either, just empty. Ethan opened the truck door carefully. Cold harbor wind rushed inside, carrying the sharp sting of chlorine stronger now, mixed with wet concrete and diesel fumes drifting from the water. Somewhere beyond the pier, foghorns moaned low across the bay. Rex jumped down beside him immediately, paws splashing against shallow puddles. The shepherd stayed close to Ethan's leg, head low, ears forward. Rain soaked through Ethan's dark green field jacket within seconds as he approached the loading dock. "Evening," he called out over the rain. "Facility is closed." The man tilted his head slightly. "You are lost, Sergeant." Ethan stopped walking. Very few civilians recognized Marines on site anymore, especially at night in the middle of an abandoned shipping yard. "Do I know you?" The man ignored the question. "You should leave." Rex suddenly barked once. Loud. Violent enough to echo beneath the steel awnings overhead. Ethan felt the leash jerk hard in his hand as the dog locked onto the silver case. The German shepherd's nose twitched rapidly now. Searching. Processing. Warning. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What is in the case? The man's expression never changed. Medical supplies. But the answer came too quickly. Too smooth. A gust of wind rolled through the loading bay, rattling loose chains somewhere above them. For one brief second the smell intensified so sharply Ethan almost tasted it in the back of his throat. Chlorine. Industrial grade. His military training snapped awake instantly. Certain chemical agents carried nearly identical odor profiles during transport stabilization. Rex moved protectively in front of Ethan now, hackles raised along his spine. The dog rarely reacted this way unless he sensed immediate danger. The man noticed it too. Interesting dog, he said quietly. He remembers things. Ethan felt cold rain sliding down the back of his neck as tension tightened across the empty dockyard. Who are you? The man glanced briefly toward the warehouse entrance behind him, where darkness swallowed the entire corridor beyond the steel doors. Then distant sirens echoed somewhere far across the harbor. Police maybe, or ambulance traffic heading downtown. The man looked back at Ethan one last time. You were never supposed to smell that shipment, he said softly. Before Ethan could respond, headlights suddenly exploded across the dock from behind them. A second vehicle accelerated into the yard fast enough to spray rainwater across the pavement. Rex barked furiously. Ethan turned instinctively toward the approaching lights. And in that split second, the world behind him erupted with the sound of twisting metal and shattering glass. The impact sounded less like a crash and more like the sky splitting open. Ethan barely had time to turn before a burst of white headlights flooded the dockyard, and the second vehicle slammed sideways into his parked truck. Metal screamed across concrete. Glass scattered through the rain like frozen sparks. Rex lunged instantly toward Ethan, shoving against his leg hard enough to knock him backward just as the force of the collision sent the pickup spinning several feet across the loading lane. The world became noise. Rain. Echoes. The deep grinding howl of steel folding against steel beneath the storm. Ethan hit the wet pavement shoulder first, pain flashing sharply through his ribs as cold water soaked into his jacket. For half a second his vision blurred beneath the dock lights. Rex barked furiously beside him, paws skidding against slick concrete, while the shepherd positioned himself protectively between Ethan and the vehicles. The black SUV was already moving again, reversing fast. Its tires hissed through standing water before disappearing into the maze of cargo containers beyond the pier. Ethan forced himself upright, breathing hard. His marine instincts cut through the confusion immediately. This was not random, not an accident. He turned toward the loading dock. The man in the white coat was gone. Only the silver reflections of rain remained beneath the flickering light where he had stood moments earlier. Rex, Ethan called sharply. The German shepherd sprinted toward the warehouse entrance without hesitation. Ethan followed despite the stabbing ache building beneath his ribs. Warehouse sea swallowed them into darkness almost immediately. The air inside felt colder than outside, thick with rust, seawater, and the lingering chemical sting Rex had detected earlier. Emergency lights glowed dim red along the ceiling, casting long shadows between stacks of abandoned shipping pallets and plastic drums covered in faded warning labels. Rain hammered the metal roof overhead like distant artillery. Rex moved silently now, focused, nose low to the ground. Ethan's boots splashed through shallow puddles leaking from broken skylights while his pulse settled into the familiar calm that used to arrive before combat operations. He reached instinctively toward the small flashlight clipped inside his jacket pocket. The beam cut through darkness just enough to reveal fresh tire marks leading deeper inside the warehouse. Then Ethan saw it. A medical transport crate sitting alone near the far wall beneath a hanging tarp. White frost clung faintly along the edges despite the warm building temperature. Industrial refrigeration. The kind used for sensitive chemical shipments. Rex stopped several feet away from it and growled low again. Ethan crouched carefully beside the container. Small hazard labels had been scratched away intentionally, but one detail remained visible beneath the peeling adhesive. A military logistics code. His stomach tightened instantly. He recognized the classification prefix from overseas operations years ago. Restricted chemical stabilization compounds. Transport only. Not legal for civilian distribution. Ethan stared at the crate while rainwater dripped steadily from his sleeves onto the concrete floor. What the hell are they moving? He whispered. Rex suddenly snapped his head toward the rear corridor. Footsteps. Faint but approaching quickly. Ethan killed the flashlight beam immediately. Darkness swallowed the warehouse again except for the dim emergency lights overhead. The footsteps stopped somewhere beyond the shelves. Then came a voice. Calm. Familiar. You should have driven away, Sergeant. Ethan's jaw tightened at the sound. Dr. Adrian Shaw stepped slowly from the shadows near the corridor entrance, rain still dripping from the shoulders of his white coat. But now Ethan noticed something different beneath the calm expression. Fear. Small. Hidden. But real. Rex bared his teeth softly, the low warning rumble vibrating through the warehouse floor. Adrian glanced toward the dog first instead of Ethan. I was hoping he would not remember the scent, he said quietly. Dogs never forget. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled over the harbor. Then the overhead emergency lights flickered once, twice, and suddenly the entire warehouse went black. Darkness settled over the warehouse so completely that even the rain outside sounded farther away. Ethan froze where he stood, every instinct sharpening at once. The only light left came from brief flashes of lightning leaking through broken skylights high above the loading bay. White bursts, then black again. Rex moved closer immediately, pressing against Ethan's leg with low, steady breaths. The German shepherd's ears tracked every sound hidden inside the dark. Somewhere across the warehouse, metal creaked softly. Then silence. Ethan slowed his breathing. Combat had taught him that panic lived in noise. Survival lived in stillness. Another flash of lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the outline of Adrian Shaw standing 20 feet away near the corridor entrance. The doctor no longer looked calm. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves while his eyes stayed fixed on the crate beside Ethan. You should not have opened that container, Adrian said quietly. His voice echoed strangely through the empty building. Ethan kept one hand near Rex's collar. You work for the government? No answer came immediately. Thunder rolled across the harbor again. Adrian stepped forward slowly into another flicker of lightning. I worked for military medicine once, he finally said. Before people realized how much money could be made moving restricted compounds through private ports. Ethan's jaw tightened. The chemical smell felt stronger now that the ventilation systems had shut down. Chlorine mixed with something colder beneath it. Artificial, sharp enough to sting the back of his throat. Rex growled softly again. Not aggressive. Warning. The shepherd's attention shifted toward the far side of the warehouse where darkness covered a second row of containers. Ethan noticed it immediately. We are not alone here, he said. Adrian's expression darkened for the first time. No, he admitted softly. And that is the problem. Somewhere behind the stacks, a faint metallic click echoed through the darkness. Ethan recognized the sound instantly. Safety latch. Someone handling equipment carefully. Rex barked once toward the shadows, his body lowering protectively in front of Ethan. Adrian looked genuinely nervous now. Listen to me carefully, he said. You and your dog need to leave before they realize what he can detect. Ethan stared at him. They? Before Adrian could answer, another voice cut through the warehouse from somewhere unseen. Calm. Cold. Dr. Shaw. The sound stopped everyone. Even the rain felt quieter afterward. Ethan could not see the speaker, only movement far beyond the storage pallets where faint red emergency lights barely touched the floor. Adrian swallowed hard. He was not supposed to follow us. He called back into the darkness. No response came for several seconds. Then slow footsteps began approaching through the warehouse. Measured. Patient. Rex's growl deepened instantly. Ethan felt the dog trembling slightly now, not from fear, but from intense focus. The same reaction Rex had shown years earlier near hidden explosives overseas. Lightning flashed again, and for half a second Ethan caught the silhouette of another man moving between the containers wearing dark tactical clothing with no visible insignia. Then darkness swallowed him again. Ethan's pulse slowed into the cold, detached, calm Marines carried into impossible situations. Rex, he whispered. The shepherd immediately shifted closer, awaiting command. Adrian glanced nervously toward the approaching footsteps. You do not understand, he whispered harshly. Your dog identified a stabilized transport agent worth millions on the black market. They will never let witnesses walk away. The words barely settled before another loud metallic sound echoed from somewhere overhead. Ethan looked up instinctively. A crane hook suspended above the warehouse ceiling had begun moving slowly along its track by remote control. Heavy chains swayed through darkness directly above the chemical crate. Rex suddenly barked violently and lunged sideways toward Ethan at the exact moment the chains snapped loose from the ceiling. The chains crashed down with enough force to shake the entire warehouse floor. Sparks burst from the overhead track as several hundred pounds of steel slammed directly onto the chemical crate, splitting part of the outer casing open with a deep metallic crack that echoed through the darkness. Ethan stumbled backward as Rex shoved hard against his leg again, forcing him away from the impact zone seconds before freezing vapor hissed from the damaged container into the cold air. The smell hit instantly. Sharp chlorine mixed with something sterile and unnatural. Ethan pulled his jacket collar over his mouth by instinct while Rex backed away, barking furiously at the spreading cloud. Somewhere in the darkness, the unseen man cursed under his breath. "Seal the breach," another voice ordered sharply from deeper inside the warehouse. Flashlights suddenly ignited across the loading bay. White beams sliced through the darkness from multiple directions, bouncing across wet concrete and towering stacks of containers. Ethan counted at least 3 men moving through the shadows in tactical gear without insignia. Professional. Coordinated. The kind of people trained not to exist officially. Adrian Shaw stepped backward slowly, panic finally visible in his face. "You do not understand what that compound can do if it aerosolizes," he whispered. Ethan grabbed the doctor's arm roughly enough to stop him from retreating. "Then start talking." Rainwater dripped steadily from the broken ceiling overhead while the chemical vapor curled low along the floor like pale smoke. Rex pressed close beside Ethan now, his amber eyes tracking every moving flashlight through the haze. The shepherd was breathing faster than before. Alert, restless, focused entirely on the men surrounding them. Adrian looked toward the tactical team approaching through the warehouse. "It was designed for battlefield stabilization," he said quietly. "A respiratory suppression agent. Temporary at first. That was the promise." Ethan felt cold settle deep in his stomach. Military medicine had experimented with dangerous compounds for decades overseas. He knew enough not to ask how many soldiers had volunteered without knowing the risks. "And now?" Ethan asked. Adrian's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Now private buyers are paying fortunes for formulas nobody was supposed to move off government records." One of the tactical men stepped closer through the haze holding a respirator mask in one hand. His voice remained calm. "Dr. Shaw, step away from the container." Rex immediately bared his teeth with a low warning growl. The man stopped walking. "Easy," he muttered, studying the German shepherd carefully. "That dog is the reason we are standing in this mess." Ethan shifted slightly in front of Rex. "You are not touching him." Lightning flashed through the broken skylights overhead, briefly illuminating the entire warehouse in silver light. For a split second, Ethan saw something hanging from the tactical man's vest beneath his rain jacket. A hospital identification badge. St. Mercy Veterans Medical Center. Then darkness swallowed it again. Ethan's pulse slowed further. Pieces finally connected inside his head with terrifying clarity. Hospital access. Medical shipments. Restricted compounds. Adrian noticed Ethan's expression change. "You see it now," he said softly. The harbor was only the transfer point. Another flash of lightning cracked overhead, while thunder rolled so deeply the warehouse walls vibrated. Somewhere beyond the docks, emergency sirens wailed faintly through the storm. Getting closer. The tactical men exchanged quick, uneasy glances. They did not want authorities here. The man with the hospital badge lowered his flashlight slightly toward Ethan. "You saw something you should not have seen tonight, Sergeant." His tone sounded almost regretful. "But this can still end quietly." Rex suddenly stiffened beside Ethan. Completely still, nose lifted toward the chemical haze drifting across the floor. Then the shepherd turned sharply toward Adrian Shaw and released a single sharp bark unlike any he had made before. Ethan looked at the doctor immediately. Adrian's face had gone pale. Very pale. One trembling hand pressed against his chest beneath the white coat. "No," Adrian whispered weakly. "Not now." Then his knees buckled beneath him as he collapsed onto the warehouse floor beside the leaking crate. Adrian Shaw hit the concrete hard enough for the sound to echo beneath the warehouse roof. The tactical men reacted instantly, 2 of them stepping back from the leaking crate, while another rushed toward the fallen doctor with a respirator mask already pulled over his face. Rex barked sharply and moved in front of Ethan again, blocking the approaching man with rigid shoulders and lowered head. The German Shepherd's fur stood high along his spine now, rainwater dripping steadily from his coat beneath the broken skylights overhead. Ethan crouched beside Adrian quickly. The doctor's breathing had become shallow and uneven. Pale vapor drifted around them in slow curling waves while thunder rolled across the harbor outside. Ethan grabbed the front of Adrian's soaked white coat. "What happened to you?" Adrian tried to answer, but another tight cough interrupted him. His eyes watered from the chemical haze. "Exposure," he whispered weakly. "Small doses over time." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You have been handling this stuff yourself." Adrian gave the faintest nod. "Long enough to know what it becomes if they finish moving it through the hospital system." One of the tactical men stepped closer through the dim red emergency light. "Sergeant, move away from him." Ethan did not move. The man's voice remained calm, but colder now. "This situation is beyond your clearance." Rex growled immediately at the sound. Deep, steady, the kind of warning that carried memory inside it. Ethan slowly stood, placing himself between Adrian and the tactical team. "You are using a veterans hospital as a transfer route." The man behind the respirator remained silent for several seconds. Rain hammered against the roof above them, while chemical vapor continued leaking from the damaged crate. Finally he spoke. "St. Mercy already receives restricted military shipments every month. Nobody questions another medical container entering the loading dock." Ethan felt sick hearing how simple the explanation sounded. Somewhere beyond the warehouse walls, another siren wailed through the storm. Closer now. Maybe city police. Maybe emergency response. The tactical men noticed it too. Their posture shifted subtly toward urgency. Adrian looked up weakly from the floor. "They plan to move the final shipment tonight," he rasped. "After that, the compound disappears into private buyers overseas." Ethan looked down at him sharply. "Why tell me any of this?" Adrian stared past Ethan toward Rex, standing guard in the drifting haze. "Because your dog knew before any machine did." Lightning flashed overhead again, flooding the warehouse in silver light. In that brief instant, Ethan saw exhaustion carved deeply into Adrian's face. Not evil. Not cruel, just broken. The doctor swallowed hard. "Rex detected trace instability in the compound at the hospital weeks ago," he whispered. "Every time he visited veterans therapy wards, he reacted near storage elevators." Ethan froze. Memory crashed through him immediately. Rex refusing to enter one hallway during Ethan's physical therapy appointment. Growling near the freight elevator 2 weeks earlier. Refusing food after they left the building. Ethan had dismissed it as stress from overseas deployment memories. But Rex had been warning him the entire time. The tactical man stepped forward again. "Enough." His hand moved slowly toward a radio clipped beneath his jacket. "We are leaving now." Rex barked violently the moment the man reached for the radio. At the exact same second, Adrian grabbed Ethan's sleeve with surprising strength. "Room 7. The doctor whispered urgently. "If they cannot recover the shipment tonight, they will erase every witness connected to it." Ethan stared at him. Cold realization settled into his chest like stone. Room 7. The ICU room from earlier. His room. Before Ethan could speak, the tactical man finally lost patience. "Take the dog," he ordered sharply to the others. Flashlights swung toward Rex through the haze. But the German Shepherd did not retreat. He planted himself directly in front of Ethan and Adrian beneath the storm-dark warehouse ceiling, amber eyes glowing in the emergency light like something ancient and unbreakable. The storm outside had become violent enough to shake the warehouse walls. Rain blasted against broken windows while lightning flashed through the skylights in cold white bursts that made every shadow move for half a second before disappearing again. Rex never took his eyes off the tactical men surrounding them. The German Shepherd stood rigid in front of Ethan and Adrian Shaw, paws planted wide against the wet concrete floor, chest rising slowly beneath rain-soaked fur. One flashlight beam swept across the dog's face, catching the amber glow in his eyes. The man holding it hesitated. "That animal is trained military," he muttered. "Do not corner him." Ethan lowered slightly beside Rex, one hand resting against the shepherd's neck. He could feel the vibration of the low growl rolling through the dog's body. Steady, focused, controlled. The same sound Rex made years ago before detecting buried explosives outside Fallujah. Adrian struggled weakly to sit upright against a shipping pallet, coughing hard into the sleeve of his white coat. "You still have time," he whispered toward the tactical men. "Call this off before more people die." The man with the hospital badge stared at him through the dim emergency lighting. "You already made your choice when you contacted military oversight." Adrian's exhausted face tightened slightly. Ethan looked sharply toward him. "You reported them?" Adrian nodded faintly. 2 weeks ago. Thunder cracked overhead. But somebody inside the system warned them before investigators arrived. Ethan understood immediately. Corruption that deep did not survive without protection from somewhere higher. The tactical men shifted uneasily now. Their calm professionalism was beginning to crack beneath the approaching sirens outside. One of them glanced toward the loading bay entrance where distant red and blue emergency lights flickered faintly through the rain. "We are out of time," he said quietly. The man with the hospital badge made a decision. "Recover the remaining case and move." He pointed directly toward Ethan. "Leave the Marine." Rex barked violently the instant 2 men stepped forward. Ethan tightened his grip on the leash. "Back up." Neither side moved for 1 long second. Rainwater dripped steadily from overhead beams into growing puddles across the floor. The chemical haze still curled low around the damaged crate, carrying that sharp, sterile chlorine smell through the warehouse. Then suddenly Rex's ears snapped toward the far corridor again. His entire posture changed instantly. Not aggression this time. Alarm. Ethan saw it immediately. "What is it?" Rex barked twice and turned sharply toward Adrian. The doctor's breathing had become dangerously shallow. His skin looked pale gray beneath the emergency lights. Ethan crouched beside him quickly. Adrian grabbed Ethan's sleeve weakly with trembling fingers. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "The compound destabilizes under stress exposure." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Adrian's eyes shifted toward the leaking crate. "If the refrigeration fully fails, the vapor spreads fast." One of the tactical men cursed under his breath and looked toward the damaged container. Frost along its edges had already begun melting into thin streams across the floor. A faint hissing sound echoed steadily from the cracked seal. The hospital badge man immediately pulled a respirator over his face. Everybody moved now. Panic spread quietly through the group for the first time. Ethan helped Adrian to his feet while Rex stayed pressed against them protectively. Somewhere beyond the loading dock, tires screeched outside, followed by the distant slam of vehicle doors. Emergency responders had finally arrived. Flashing red and blue lights pulsed faintly through the rain beyond the warehouse entrance. The tactical men exchanged sharp looks beneath the emergency glow. "We cannot let responders walk into this exposure," Adrian whispered painfully. Ethan stared at the leaking crate, then toward the approaching sirens outside. Too many people. Too little time. Rex suddenly pulled hard toward the rear exit corridor, barking urgently now. Ethan looked down at him. The shepherd was staring toward a side hallway Ethan had barely noticed before. A faded sign hung above the door beneath flickering lights. "Medical transfer access." Adrian's face drained of color completely. "Oh God," he whispered. "That tunnel connects directly to St. Mercy Hospital." For 1 long second nobody inside the warehouse moved. Rain hammered the roof overhead, while red and blue emergency lights flashed faintly through the loading bay outside like distant lightning. Then every pair of eyes turned toward the narrow hallway marked medical transfer access. The tactical men understood immediately what Adrian meant. If the damaged compound reached the hospital ventilation system through the underground tunnel, hundreds of patients could be exposed before sunrise. Ethan felt the cold settle deep inside his chest. Veterans. Nurses. Elderly patients sleeping under oxygen masks upstairs. People who would never even know danger had entered the building. Rex barked sharply again and pulled toward the hallway. The German shepherd's instincts had already decided before the humans caught up. Adrian leaned heavily against the pallet behind him, struggling for breath. "The transfer tunnel was designed during the Cold War," he rasped. "Direct freight access between the harbor warehouses and military medical storage." One of the tactical men cursed softly beneath his respirator. "The sealed doors should still be active." Adrian shook his head weakly. "Not if internal staff disabled them." Silence followed that sentence. Heavy silence. Because everyone standing there suddenly realized the same thing. Someone inside St. Mercy Hospital was still helping move the compound. The man with the hospital badge stepped backward toward the corridor entrance, flashlight beam shaking slightly now. "We shut the tunnel down," he ordered the others. Immediately. But before anyone moved, Rex suddenly snarled low and deep toward the tactical man himself. Ethan looked sharply at the dog. The shepherd was not reacting to fear anymore. He was detecting something specific. The hospital badge man noticed it too. "Get the dog away from me," he snapped. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Rainwater dripped from the man's jacket sleeve onto the concrete floor. Then Ethan saw it. White residue near the cuff. Powdered chemical frost. Fresh. Adrian saw it too. His exhausted expression shifted instantly. "You opened the containment seals manually," he whispered. The man's silence confirmed everything. He had triggered the leak himself. Not an accident. Not panic. Deliberate. Another tactical member stared toward him in disbelief. "You said the release was controlled." The hospital badge man slowly removed the respirator from his face. Mid-40s. Tired eyes. Clean haircut. The kind of face people trusted inside hospitals every day. "Containment failed the moment this Marine arrived," he said coldly. "We could not risk military investigators tracing the route." Ethan stepped protectively in front of Adrian, while Rex's growl deepened into something almost primal. The man looked directly at Ethan now. "You should have ignored the smell at the harbor." Thunder cracked overhead hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Then suddenly emergency floodlights outside the warehouse snapped on, blasting white light through the loading bay doors. Voices echoed beyond the rain. Fire crews. Hazmat responders. The tactical men immediately panicked. "We are out," one muttered before disappearing toward a side exit between containers. Another followed seconds later. The entire operation was collapsing too fast. Sirens wailed louder outside now. Boots splashed through puddles near the loading dock entrance. The hospital badge man looked toward the tunnel corridor one final time, then back at Ethan. "Room 7 was prepared hours ago," he said quietly. "If the compound transfer failed, the witness protocol activates automatically." Ethan's blood ran cold. Witness protocol. Hospital room. Injection. Suddenly the memory of Rex attacking the syringe in the ICU made horrifying sense. Adrian grabbed Ethan's sleeve weakly again. "They already tagged your medical file after the harbor incident," he whispered. "You were never supposed to wake up." The words hit harder than the storm outside. Rex pressed tightly against Ethan's leg, eyes locked on the man standing near the tunnel. Then somewhere deep inside the underground hallway, a mechanical alarm suddenly began blaring beneath the floor. Loud, metallic, rhythmic. Air containment failure. The hospital badge man's expression changed instantly from confidence to fear. "No," he whispered. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "The ventilation system just activated." Ethan looked toward the dark tunnel stretching beneath the hospital, while cold chemical vapor drifted slowly into the corridor like pale smoke searching for somewhere to go. The alarm beneath the floor echoed through the tunnel like the heartbeat of something dying underground. Long metallic pulses. Slow at first, then faster. Red emergency lights flickered on inside the narrow corridor, marked medical transfer access, bathing the drifting chemical vapor in a dull crimson glow that made the air itself look wounded. Ethan stared into the darkness stretching beneath St. Mercy Hospital while cold rainwater slid from his sleeves onto the concrete. Somewhere above that tunnel, patients were sleeping beneath warm blankets, completely unaware that danger was moving silently beneath them. Rex barked sharply and pulled toward the corridor entrance again. The German shepherd's instincts had become impossible to ignore now. Every time humans hesitated, the dog already knew where death was heading next. Adrian Shaw struggled to stand fully upright beside the pallet, one hand gripping his chest beneath the soaked white coat. His breathing sounded thinner with every passing second. "The ventilation system cycles every 8 minutes, he whispered painfully. "If the vapor reaches the intake shafts," he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Ethan already understood. The hospital badge man looked toward the tunnel with visible panic now. The calm professionalism he carried earlier had disappeared beneath sweat and fear. "Seal the lower access doors," he ordered into the radio clipped to his jacket. Only static answered back. The rest of his team had already abandoned the warehouse. Thunder rolled overhead hard enough to rattle the emergency lights along the ceiling. Outside the loading bay, hazmat crews shouted instructions through the storm, while rotating emergency lights painted the rain in flashes of blue and red. But nobody outside understood the real threat yet. They still believed the danger was contained inside the warehouse. Rex suddenly growled again, this time toward the tunnel floor itself. Ethan followed the dog's gaze downward. Thin streams of pale vapor were already slipping beneath the corridor door like smoke searching for air. Adrian saw it too. The pressure system activated early, he whispered. Something inside the hospital triggered emergency airflow. Ethan's pulse slowed into that cold marine calm that arrived only when choices became simple. Save people. Move now. He looked toward the hospital badge man. How do we shut it down? The man hesitated too long before answering. There is an override room beneath the south wing of the hospital. Adrian shook his head weakly. Only authorized medical transport staff have access. The hospital badge man gave a hollow laugh that sounded almost broken beneath the storm. Then I suppose tonight I finally become useful. Ethan did not trust him. Not fully. But time had collapsed into minutes now. Somewhere deep inside the tunnel, another warning siren erupted, followed by the loud mechanical roar of industrial ventilation fans starting up beneath the hospital foundation. The vapor along the corridor floor immediately began moving faster toward the underground passage. Rex barked violently. Ethan made his decision. You are coming with us, he said sharply to the hospital badge man. If this kills people, you answer for every one of them. The man lowered his eyes briefly. Shame flickered there for the first time. Adrian grabbed Ethan's sleeve again before he could move. Listen to me carefully, the doctor whispered. The compound does not behave like normal gas exposure. Ethan looked down at him. Adrian's exhausted eyes drifted toward Rex. Animals sensed the neurological effect first. Confusion, breathing suppression, loss of awareness. Ethan's stomach tightened immediately. That explained everything. Rex had smelled danger long before machines could detect instability. The dog had not simply recognized chemicals. He had recognized death itself moving quietly through the air. Another deep alarm echoed beneath the tunnel. The hospital badge man turned toward the corridor urgently. If the intake reaches the ICU floors first, he stopped speaking abruptly. Ethan saw the realization hit him. Room 7 sat directly above the southern ventilation shaft. The same room prepared earlier for witness elimination. The same room where Ethan had almost died hours from now in another version of this night. Rex suddenly lunged forward into the corridor darkness without waiting for command. Ethan grabbed the leash instantly and followed as red emergency lights flickered across the narrow underground tunnel leading straight towards St. Mercy Hospital. The tunnel beneath St. Mercy Hospital felt older than the city above it. Narrow concrete walls stretched endlessly beneath flickering red emergency lights, while ancient ventilation pipes rattled overhead with the deep mechanical roar of airflow systems forcing air through the underground passageways. Water dripped steadily from rusted ceiling joints, mixing with the sharp chlorine scent drifting through the corridor. Rex moved several feet ahead of Ethan now, paws striking wet concrete in fast, controlled rhythm. The German shepherd did not hesitate once. Every instinct inside him pointed forward. Ethan followed closely behind, while the hospital badge man struggled to keep pace beside them, breathing hard beneath the humid chemical air. Somewhere farther back, Adrian Shaw leaned against the tunnel wall, fighting to remain conscious. Keep moving, Ethan called over his shoulder. Adrian nodded weakly, but did not answer. The storm above them groaned through the underground pipes like distant thunder trapped beneath the earth. Emergency alarms echoed from deeper inside the hospital structure now. Not loud enough to cause panic upstairs yet. Just warning tones. Quiet. Mechanical. The kind hospitals used every night for system malfunctions no patient ever noticed. But Ethan knew better. Death did not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it traveled silently through air vents while people slept beneath warm blankets, believing they were safe. Rex suddenly stopped near a steel security door halfway down the tunnel. The shepherd barked sharply and pawed at the lower frame, where pale vapor already curled through the seams. Ethan reached the door seconds later and grabbed the handle. Locked. The hospital badge man stepped forward immediately. This leads directly beneath the south ICU wing, he said breathlessly. The override room is on the other side. Ethan stared through the narrow, reinforced glass window. Darkness beyond. red emergency lights flickering faintly across equipment racks inside, and vapor drifting slowly along the floor. "Open it." The man hesitated. Ethan's voice hardened instantly. "Now." Trembling slightly, the man removed an identification badge clipped beneath his rain jacket and pressed it against the scanner beside the door. The old magnetic system buzzed once, then failed. "Red light. Access denied." "They already shut me out," he whispered. Rex growled low beside Ethan. The shepherd's ears tilted sharply toward the other side of the door. Then Ethan heard it too. Faint coughing somewhere beyond the hallway. Human voices. Nurses maybe. Hospital staff. The ventilation system had already reached occupied areas. Adrian finally caught up behind them, breathing painfully against the tunnel wall. "Manual override," he whispered weakly. "There should be a mechanical release behind the lower maintenance panel." Ethan dropped to one knee beside the steel door and ripped open the rusted access plate near the floor. Inside sat an old emergency lever covered in dust and grease from decades without use. He grabbed it with both hands and pulled hard. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then metal groaned through the corridor as ancient locking bolts slowly retracted inside the wall. The steel door finally cracked open just enough for chemical vapor to spill into the tunnel in pale, swirling clouds. Rex immediately pushed through the opening first without waiting for command. Ethan followed close behind into the underground access hall beneath St. Mercy Hospital. The air inside felt warmer, thicker. Hospital air. Sterile cleaning chemicals mixed with oxygen tanks and industrial ventilation heat. Overhead fluorescent lights buzzed weakly while emergency alarms flashed red against white-tiled walls. Somewhere above them, stretchers rolled quickly across hospital floors. Nurses shouted instructions. Elevator bells chimed endlessly. Life continuing unaware directly overhead. Then Ethan saw the first hospital worker collapsed against the far corridor wall near an open ventilation grate. Conscious but disoriented. Struggling to breathe normally. Rex barked sharply and sprinted toward the south hallway before Ethan could react. The German shepherd already understood what the humans were only beginning to realize. The vapor was not spreading randomly anymore. It was moving toward the ICU intake system. Toward room 7. The south ICU corridor looked almost peaceful from a distance. Soft fluorescent lights glowed against pale hospital walls while monitors beeped steadily behind closed patient doors. Nurses moved quickly between rooms carrying charts and medication trays, unaware that danger was already flowing invisibly through the ventilation system above their heads. But Rex knew. The German shepherd sprinted down the hallway with absolute certainty, claws scraping lightly against polished tile floors while every nurse and orderly turned in shock at the sight of a military K9 racing through intensive care. Ethan followed close behind, soaked from the storm, breathing hard as hospital alarms echoed faintly through the lower floors beneath them. "Move people away from the south wing vents," he shouted toward a stunned nurse near the station desk. "Now." The nurse blinked in confusion. "Sir, you cannot be in." Adrian Shaw staggered into the corridor behind Ethan, gripping the wall for balance. The moment one of the ICU doctors recognized him, the entire atmosphere changed. "Dr. Shaw," someone whispered. Adrian looked toward the ventilation grates lining the lower walls beneath the patient rooms. Thin pale vapor was already beginning to slip through the metal slats, almost invisibly beneath the fluorescent lights. "Shut the oxygen circulation system down immediately," Adrian rasped. "Seal every room on this floor." Panic spread quietly through the nurses after that. Not screaming panic. Hospital panic. Focused. Fast. Controlled fear hidden beneath professional voices. Staff began moving patients away from lower intake rooms, while overhead speakers crackled with emergency system announcements. Somewhere nearby, a child started crying softly behind a waiting room door. Rex suddenly stopped in front of room 7, the same room prepared earlier for Ethan. The shepherd barked sharply and scratched at the sealed ICU door hard enough for nearby nurses to jump. Ethan reached the door seconds later and froze. Through the narrow glass window, he saw vapor already drifting along the floor inside the room. The ventilation shaft directly above the bed rattled loudly as airflow systems pushed contaminated air downward into the ICU. "Open it," Ethan ordered. "The room is under automatic isolation," a nurse answered nervously. "We need authorization." Adrian stepped forward weakly. "I am authorizing it." The electronic lock buzzed. The door slid open. Cold, sterile air rushed outward, carrying the sharp chemical scent stronger than before. Rex entered first immediately, nose lifted toward the vent overhead. The room looked exactly like it had hours later in Ethan's nightmare memory. Blue monitor lights, white sheets, heart monitor blinking steadily beside an empty ICU bed waiting for its patient. Waiting for him. Ethan stared at the room in silence while realization settled heavily inside his chest. If Rex had not followed the scent at the harbor tonight, Ethan would have ended this night unconscious in this exact bed while somebody quietly erased him behind locked hospital doors. Adrian moved toward the ventilation controls beside the wall with trembling hands. There should be a manual purge sequence. His breathing sounded worse now. Shallow. Tight. Rex barked sharply toward the ceiling vent again. Then suddenly the shepherd lunged toward the bedside table beside the empty hospital bed and knocked a sealed medication tray onto the floor. Syringes scattered across the tile. Ethan crouched quickly and grabbed one of the labels. No patient name. No chart authorization. Just a coded pharmaceutical tag from military inventory. Adrian saw it and closed his eyes painfully. Witness protocol, he whispered. Prepared in advance. Ethan stared at the syringe while cold anger settled into him deeper than fear. Not rage. Something quieter. The exhaustion of realizing how close death had walked beside him without a sound. Then the overhead ventilation system suddenly groaned louder. The airflow reversed direction. Every monitor inside room 7 flickered once beneath the fluorescent lights. Adrian looked sharply toward the vent controls. No, he whispered. Someone upstairs just activated full circulation. Rex immediately turned toward the hallway and barked furiously toward the ICU nursing station, where a tall figure in a white medical coat had just appeared beneath the flashing emergency lights. The figure standing beneath the flashing emergency lights did not look dangerous at first. Just another exhausted hospital doctor in a white coat moving through chaos after midnight. Nurses rushed around him carrying oxygen tanks and patient files while overhead alarms continued pulsing through the ICU wing. But Rex knew immediately. The German shepherd's growl rolled low through room 7 before the man even stepped closer. Ethan turned toward the hallway slowly, the military syringe still cold in his hand. Dr. Adrian Shaw stared at the figure with visible dread. Marcus, he whispered. The man stopped outside the ICU doorway beneath the pale fluorescent lights. Mid-50s. Silver hair at the temples. Calm eyes behind wire frame glasses. Chief Medical Administrator Marcus Holloway. The kind of man families trusted with life and death decisions every day without question. Rainwater still clung faintly to the shoulders of his coat, as though he had only recently come inside from the storm. He looked first at Adrian, then at Ethan, finally at Rex. I was hoping the dog would not survive the harbor, Marcus said quietly. The hallway around them seemed to freeze after those words. Nurses nearby slowly backed away as security officers emerged from the far elevators responding to the emergency alarms. Marcus glanced toward the ventilation controls inside room 7, where warning lights blinked red across the panel. You have no idea what panic this hospital will face if those systems shut down suddenly, he said calmly. Adrian's voice trembled with exhaustion. You were moving restricted compounds through veteran care units. Marcus sighed softly like a man tired of carrying heavy secrets for too many years. I was protecting this hospital from bankruptcy. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Marcus looked toward the ICU corridor where patients were being transferred away from the south wing. Federal contracts disappeared years ago, he continued quietly. Funding collapsed. Staff cuts. Closed wards. Dying veterans abandoned by the same country that promised to care for them. His eyes darkened slightly. Then private defense buyers offered another solution. Adrian shook his head weakly. At the cost of innocent lives. Marcus looked genuinely sad hearing that. No, he whispered. At the cost of silence. Rex barked violently the moment Marcus took one slow step toward room 7. Security officers immediately moved between them while nurses rushed patients farther down the hall. The ventilation alarms suddenly changed tone overhead. Lower. Slower. Then one by one, the red warning lights along the ICU ceiling faded back to white. Adrian stared toward the control panel in disbelief. The airflow reversed, he whispered. Ethan looked toward Marcus sharply. The older doctor gave a faint, tired nod. I shut the circulation sequence down before coming upstairs. Silence settled over the corridor except for distant monitor beeps and rain tapping softly against hospital windows. Rex's growl slowly faded as the shepherd studied Marcus carefully, not trusting him, but sensing something had changed. Marcus removed his hospital badge quietly and placed it on the counter beside the nursing station. "I am finished running from this," he said softly. Security officers stepped forward cautiously after that. Nobody shouted. Nobody fought. The storm outside had already exhausted everyone beyond anger. Adrian slid slowly down against the ICU wall, breathing easier now that the ventilation alarms had stopped. Ethan knelt beside Rex in the quiet hallway while nurses continued moving patients safely away from the south wing. The German shepherd pressed his head gently against Ethan's shoulder for the first time all night. Warm, steady, alive. Dawn began creeping faintly through the hospital windows beyond the corridor, pale gold against storm clouds finally breaking apart over Baltimore Harbor. Somewhere downstairs, exhausted firefighters rolled hoses back toward their trucks while paramedics carried fresh coffee through the rain-soaked parking lot. Life moving forward again, one small breath at a time. Ethan rested one hand against Rex's neck and closed his eyes briefly. The shepherd had smelled death long before any machine, long before any human conscience finally woke up. And somewhere deep inside the quiet morning settling over St. Mercy Hospital, Ethan understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. Some miracles do not arrive like lightning. They arrive on four legs, breathing beside you in the dark until the danger finally passes.